Hi, this is your host, Bhartia, and welcome to another episode of TFR Let's Talk. And today we have with us Allan Hirt, Managing Partner at SQLHA. Allan, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit about yourself and the company.
So I've been working with SQL Server in various forms since its Sybase days, so a long time. I got into the availability space in the late 90s. I've been using the clustering feature in Windows since it was before it was a feature. And I worked at Microsoft for a time where I was a consultant there, but I also wrote things like the SQL Server 2000 clustering white paper. I've worked with the dev team for a long time, and I've just been doing what I do in the availability space for well over 20 years now. The company SQLHA is a company I founded, and we focus on helping customers achieve their goals with their SQL Server deployments. Now, it could be infrastructure related, could be performance related, whether it's on-premises, physical, virtual, cloud, hybrid, it doesn't really matter. We work in all types of environments that we're not stuck to any one particular cloud. For example, we have customers in AWS, we have customers in Azure. So really, we help customers transform their environments to what they need to be.
And you will be speaking at the upcoming Cloud Availability Symposium. Talk a bit about the talk that you will be delivering at the event.
Sure. So the particular talk I'll be delivering is on business continuity for hybrid and cloud-based SQL Server deployments. So in that talk, I'm going to cover not just the best practices, because that's sort of a standard thing, but sort of the options you have, how you approach these things, and what do you really need to consider, because doing just cloud native, as I like to call it, which is I'm doing everything up in the cloud, is different than hybrid, because you've got like sort of 1 foot in each, and you need to sort of figure things out like your networking, how things are going to work that way, what are the other bits of infrastructure you may need. And then, people need to understand the difference of what they do today and how they're going to deploy in the cloud, and how the different deployment models affect how all that works.
And you're also participating on a panel which is about maintaining and optimizing performance in high availability environments. Talk a bit about that panel.
Sure, I'm on a panel with a few other noted folks in the SQL Server community, like Joey D'Antoni, Melody Zacharias, and Mike Walsh. The reality is that, and I always say this, especially when I'm talking to customers, but I've said it in talks, so I'm not talking out of turn, that panel is important because when you're architecting solutions, you can't just be available, or you can't have great performance, but you're down all the time. Everything needs to be in balance. And of course, that means making trade-offs, but at the end of the day, what's the point of a highly available system that doesn't perform well, nobody's going to use it? What's the point of a highly reliable and available system that doesn't perform at all? So you can't really talk about, even though the focus to a degree of the symposium and the day will be availability, you still can't ignore the performance aspect of things.
Today, we kind of live in a cloud-driven world where cloud does solve a lot of problems when it comes to high availability, disaster recovery. But the fact is also that cloud is not a magical place. A lot of problems don't just simply disappear just because you move to the cloud. So can you also talk about how you're seeing the evolution of HA in this cloud-driven world?
Well, I think that, to me, not surprisingly, being a consultant, my answer is it depends. Because right now we have essentially 2 deployment models in the cloud for database type stuff. You have infrastructure as a service, or IaaS, where that's just a VM in the cloud. So if you're virtualized on premises, it's just a VM in the cloud, and you're managing the OS, you're doing all the traditional things. I don't see that changing, to be honest with you. People are always going to do some of that. Then we have like platform as a service, so think Azure SQL Database, Azure SQL Managed Instance, Amazon RDS, Google, I think it's Cloud Solution or Cloud Database for SQL, whatever they call it. So you have that, and the difference there is huge in the sense that if you're letting if you're saying, I'm going to use PaaS, you're basically saying the platform is going to then provide your underlying availability. Let's take performance out of that for a second. So you may not either configure anything, or you click a button and then it's sort of automatically configured for you and you're at the mercy of the platform. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. That's just the reality of what it is. Whereas in the IaaS world, which is more what we're used to as technologists, historically, you're deploying an operating system, you're doing all the traditional things you did on premises, but now you're dealing with the cloud's infrastructure and how it changes things. For example, like in Azure, you've got to deal potentially with load balancers or a different way to deploy a cluster. In like AWS, where the way they deal with zones is differently than how you deal with zones and all that kind of stuff in Azure a bit. So the networking is just a tad different. So you had to really think about how this lays out versus how you did it on premises. But inside the VM, it's largely the same. Whereas the PaaS stuff, and as more and more people use PaaS and give up that control of deploying everything, I think that's going to be the biggest shift over the next few years of how you deploy. And as more people use PaaS, realizing they're not in that tight coupling, and that all their service level agreements, their recovery time objectives, their recovery point objectives are going to be gated by the platform and how that's deployed.
Allan, thank you so much for taking time out today, and of course talk about SQLHA, the challenges that are there in this space, and of course your participation at the upcoming availability symposium. Thanks for also sharing those insights, and I would love to have you back on the show because there are so many things to talk about in this space. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'd love to be back.